Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our second episode of the week of Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
And so, okay, sorry, I had an idea and then I lost it mid-sentence. So some of you may know, and some of you may have seen on our Instagram and our Facebook, and I don't know if we release them on Twitter too, but for some of us in the actual podcast and the making of it, we've made these shirts that say on them, Church is Stupid, comma butt. Well, they don't actually say the comma. It's actually just a...
It is a comma.
But you have to enunciate it, otherwise it's not assumed to be there.
Church is stupid butt doesn't roll off the tongue as well.
Yeah, the commas...
Do you remember the first week when everybody made fun of me for saying comma, by the way?
And then it just became a thing.
And now everyone's like, we can't say without the comma.
No, I don't think that happened. I don't think it was you. I don't think so. I'm going to give Andy credit. So.
Okay, that's fair.
Please
Anyhow,
don't. I don't want it. But I was wearing that this Sunday in our church. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw the announcements. That there was an announcement about the podcast. And... I didn't get talked to about it from anybody about it, and I was so disheartened.
Hey, really?
Well, Andy, what kind of image do you think that shirt gives off about the church?
Church. I was going about myself, and then I was going. But
it's not all about you.
Well, I was going to adapt it from myself into. Okay, now you've made this awkward, and I'm flustered.
Oh my!
Why does this happen so easily at the beginning of every episode? I get flustered.
I do seem to be a bit flustered.
But yeah, we have these shirts, and if you check out Instagram and Facebook, you can see us wearing them. Mm-hmm. But they're this simple design, and it's kind of a conversation starter. Mm-hmm. Or I guess the goal is to make a conversation out of it and to give people a little bit more information about this. Yeah. But we're in this generation right now where people don't go up and talk to people. And even with COVID and all this kind of stuff, people don't come up and talk to people anymore.
You mean even before COVID?
Well, sorry, I said this
You said even with COVID, and I was like...
especially
with COVID.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry, I was just trying to see which one you were...
I knew what you were...
COVID is a little...
Yeah.
Whole
sorry.
But I remember back... a couple of years ago in high school, when I was in high school, only a few years back there.
Okay, Andy, I get it.
6 now, so it's a while. But
10
we had
this year.
Okay.
We're trying to move on with the podcast, but we're making Ruth feel old
there's
again.
There's this group in at least the United Methodist Church, and I don't mean to call things out, but this is going to be a lot of this call out.
Snap.
That goes to different churches and basically takes a look at their hospitality, their imagery that they're giving off, like all of these different factors to what makes a church a church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what I thought it was. I was like...
I've told Ruth what it is, but I don't want to call them out directly, but they came to the church that we were at as a family. And we knew this church, no offense to them, but they aren't as including of outsiders. It's not something that really happened there, other than for one person, which was my dad. This group, when they came to view our church to give us a diagnosis of what was going on, gave us incredibly great reviews, because after the service was over, my dad saw that they were new people and walked up and talked to them, and found out information about them, and they're kind of all this kind of a group, but that wasn't an actual portrayal of what the actual church was, and so they had a false idea of how good their service was, how good their people interaction was.
Yeah. Because
there was this one individual that was willing to go out there and talk to people.
Right.
And I think this is something that happens in a lot of churches now. Well, maybe it doesn't happen in a lot of churches now because of COVID, but there are certain individuals who are very able to go out and talk to new people, who are able to do all that kind of stuff. But if those people are gone on any given Sunday, then you just lose people. Yeah. And that changes the image completely of what people see.
Okay, yeah.
And I guess that's where I was going with the beginning of this, and now it's just become a rant. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think what you're highlighting is that every single week can be a different church experience. Yeah. It can portray a totally different image. And I think that's going to be true no matter what. Even what if the person's having a bad day? Mm-hmm. What if you come in next to somebody who had a really terrible week and they're not exactly the friendliest. I think that's part of just being human and being in a human experience is that. But yeah, it can definitely be misleading, I think, for certain programs that spend one Sunday at a place instead of evaluating, as I kind of spoke on last episode, that we really can't judge things based on one snapshot. Mm-hmm. You really got to see the longevity, and it can be kind of interesting how some churches can really make it look great for a day. Like I had talked about at my college, where they make everything seem so amazingly spiritual for that 1 week when high schoolers come to visit. I went on one of those visits when I was in high school, and it looked awesome. It really did. Mm-hmm. When I went to college there, I experienced something entirely different. And yeah, so I think that's a really bad
way to go about things.
It's a bad way to go about things.
So I know we don't want to talk about this group's actual name, but I would just like to say that I have no idea what you're actually talking about, because I've never heard of any sort of evaluation group that like evaluates churches like that at all.
There's
a lot, and it's not unique to the UMC.
Okay, can you just give a brief overview of what they do? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people, or there might be a lot of people like me who are trying to find this connection but have never had any experience with something like that.
On some level, there's whatever these groups are doing, they're usually coming into a church to evaluate a couple of things like hospitality. Okay. So who shows up? You did, yeah. Okay. Who says like, do people greet you? Do people not? What does your worship style seem like? So is it an inviting worship style? Okay. Do people feel like they're encouraged to participate, or is it more of a stadium stagnate experience, or bystander experience, I think is what I was
So is it like Yelp reviews?
No, it's not. It's intentional. It's usually run by an organization. Okay. In our case, it would be run by the United Methodist Church. Okay. That is seeking to make sure that churches are thriving and that they're doing what they're called to do. So it's not by no means is it intended to be like a cruel thing, but when it gets treated like a formality instead of something that needs to be taken seriously, it can misrepresent churches. On both sides of the spectrum. I don't think it's just if you happen to have they come on the best day ever, but if they come on the worst day ever, it can also greatly affect it. Okay. And I will confess that I don't know a whole lot about that particular program. However, anytime you take just one snapshot of anything, it's the same thing. Like when I went up for commissioning in the UMC, I had to submit one sermon of myself. Right. And I filmed it, sent it in, and I had a whole bunch of people afterwards be like, well, we don't really feel like that really represented how you preach. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's kind of awkward trying to preach when you know that this is the one time that people are like, not that every time people aren't listening, but when like you know you're going to be judged on it.
Yeah, you're being analyzed for it kind of thing.
Then you tend to get more nervous or something like that, which is funny because now all of my sermons are recorded. So anybody could easily watch them. But yeah, I think when that happens, it's a poor representation of what's really going on. Okay. And even as a pastor in the UMC, again, we've talked about this before, we have an itinerant system. We move around a lot. Yeah. I don't like to make changes before about a year in. And that's not because I don't think changes need to happen, unless they're like dire changes that absolutely the culture of the church needs to change. But because I don't really understand that church. Yeah. I haven't been there long enough to know what is actually working. Is this thing that needs to change symptomatic of a bigger problem, or is it the problem? And you can cut off or you can put Band-Aids on all the things you want, but if you need stitches, that's not going to help you. Mm-hmm. And so I like to take time to evaluate personally. this was a long tangent about
Sorry,
it.
no, I was laughing at the fact that you said that you don't like to make changes when you first come to a church, but I think we changed everything when you first came to this church. You and I alone, starting an entire basement service, starting a podcast. It was just a side rant. Sorry.
Well, no, you're not
Calling you
wrong.
out.
You're not wrong. This is, I mean, I've only been at this church for
Not even a year?
8 months,
Yeah.
I think, and we've done a lot. But I don't necessarily think these are changes. These are additions.
Okay, fair enough.
See, I didn't. Yeah. So sorry. But it is funny.
So-
You're right. Coming from me, that's pretty funny.
So would you say that just to maybe wrap that short topic up, would you say that systems like the ones that we were talking about in the sort of mentality that it can bring along with it can be detrimental
Yes.
to
Yeah.
how like to
They can be
what a
very
church
much so.
should be? I would say, because I don't want to say to the image of the church, because the whole point of our discussion is
Yeah.
that the image of the church shouldn't be what's important.
Well,
but-
it's like all things. Like the reason that people want a church's image to be great is because they want to be a good portrayal of Christ.
Yeah.
Right? But when you get
Hopefully.
caught up, well,
Yeah.
I hope, when you get caught up in, we got to make sure that everyone thinks we're perfect, then you start sweeping all of these things under the rug.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it isn't a reflection of Christ. So
Yeah.
it's in the same way, programs like this are fully intended to, how can we help? How can we come in and give some help and see, are you thriving? In what ways do you need to adjust, or could you adjust maybe
Yeah.
to better reach those around you?
But because of how short term the valuation is, you're saying
it
sometimes
can
it
be.
can lead to that being the most important thing is
Yes.
how like when you're scrambling to clean your house when it's getting inspected or something for one day, but then
He says because we get a parsonage inspection once a year and we scramble to clean every time.
But no, but I get what you're saying because like you said before, the church is supposed to be a place of transformation, right? And not just a place where you rack up the numbers and make that the forefront of what you claim your movement's supposed to be about. So it's supposed to be about real real genuine spiritual transformation. So if the forefront becomes only, or the most important thing becomes give the church or make sure the church is showing off its best self on this one day, and then sometimes it can be easy to lose track of the real
Absolutely.
motivation behind
and
it.
So, and that's something that we're very aware of. I think people are becoming more aware of the images the church tries to portray.
Yeah.
And as we talked about earlier, with all the scandals that have been able to be revealed over the past, that image has torn apart.
Yeah.
In and of itself.
A lot of the veil has been lifted.
Yeah,
you
it
could say.
really, really has. And as we become aware of this, what was my point? Oh, crap. Oh, guys.
Talking
I'll let
about
you
transformation
think. I'll let you
and
think
what's
real
really
quick
important
while I
and
continue
everything.
talking
and-
about this organization thing
Yeah.
and how it is detrimental. So, essentially, like when it's set up, this whole idea of having yourself evaluated, it's set up by the leaders in any given church. They schedule and they have to pay for these people to come in and evaluate them.
Yeah.
They're given a time frame of when they're going to have the evaluations happen, and it could be like the time frame of a certain month. And so they're not supposed to tell their congregation about this evaluation happening. Like, it's not supposed to leave, but it always does.
Okay.
And so you never get this like fully
Genuine
picture,
Yeah.
of what the church looks like on a given Sunday because of that.
I see. Okay.
And so it leads to falsehoods and a couple of other genuine issues that happen. And so you get you won't ever get the actual review of what
I
it's
see.
supposed
I
to
see.
look like.
I know we didn't mean. I'm sure we didn't mean to talk about for 14 minutes about this one specific thing.
Well, it's
but-
important. It's something important to talk about, especially with image,
Right, yeah.
because it's this idea that we don't portray an accurate portrayal of what we are, especially to newcomers. They don't see the issues that somebody who's been there for a while sees, different things with youth ministries or different kinds of issues that happen after you've been there for a year. I know we've had conversations about this before of when you become a member, you have to actually pay to be a member kind of thing, or that your tithes and your that you actually have to give a membership fee for every month. That like that's something that you don't see as a new visitor. Like we aren't this like see-through like thing. You can't see everything about a church when you first go there and look at it.
It's not always a glass house or glass church, you could say.
Yeah. There are several blacked off or smoky areas.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
You really
I get what
can't
you're
tell
saying.
what's going on.
Okay.
Well, and yeah, what I was gonna say earlier was that that's something that I think we're becoming increasingly aware of, and it makes me very much so distrust churches that pretend like they're really, really super friendly, or even maybe not pretend, but that say, "Oh, we're a super friendly church." When I hear those words, I'm like, "Oh no," and it's not. They might honestly be the friendliest church ever, but like when somebody says that, I'm instantly like, "Oh crap, what's gonna happen?"
Yeah.
And it's funny because when we first started talking about like this podcast, and part of this podcast came from the idea to do discussion-based service that intentionally allowed for honest, open conversation amongst people.
Yeah.
So you could come in, and if you were having a really, really crappy day, you could just be that. If you came in and doubted God, you could just be that and be who you are, where you are, because the church should be open to all people, no matter what state of mind they are in.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was asked right away with this, well, how are you going to promote it? And I was like, not promoting it. and I was kind of looked at like I was crazy, and I'm like, listen, anybody who actually wants this kind of a service, they will not come if you put honest, open discussions on a billboard.
We swear, we promise. Yeah.
It's really gonna be great. Like, that has to be something that, and in part, it has to be something that's genuine, you know? Like, people have to come, and if it's a genuine experience, I truly believe they'll want to come back, and they'll want to tell people about it.
Yeah.
And if it's not, they won't. Now, that's not to say never market anything or anything like that, but it's sort of this, we're relying too much on an image that's dead, and we're relying on just letting that exist. Instead of doing the genuine changes that need to happen, we put the pretty paint on the rotting walls and say, "Oh, it's fine, everybody. At least it looked really nice the one day everybody came and showed up."
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's like when you cover the stain on the rug or on the carpet with a rug or something like that. You're like, "Oh, look, see, it's not here." No, it's still there. And that's essentially what I think a lot of churches have sought to do unintentionally. Again, I don't always think these are the forefront of people's minds, but when you're more concerned about how it looks to other people than you are about whether or not you're making disciples for Christ, there's a really big, I know I've said it before, but that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, I know that you asked, this is something that when we talk about imagery, I brought up pretty quickly. There's a church in Michigan, and I feel free to call out these people because of what they named their church. This church is called the Church That Doesn't Suck, or at least it used to be. I have not heard anything from them in like the past 4 years or 5 years. This is the actual name of the church. It's on their website. It's on the internet. It's like, it is the church that doesn't suck. And there's a whole story behind that, and the youth group named the church kind of thing.
Sure, yeah.
And being somebody who, I think as far as when it comes to churches, I see through a little bit more of the smoke and mirror that people put up, and I could be completely wrong. But in my honest opinion, that name is a lie.
It's a misnomer.
So, yeah, when you enter the church, there's a couple of things that give you this idea that this church is open, welcome to people, like starting conversations. There's the front hall coffee shop, which is something that we are seeing a few more times in churches now.
Yeah, it's really popular.
Yeah, the front hall space where you can get like a coffee and like you can actually talk to people and like learn things about people. But at the same time, if you don't have a congregation that approaches people,
it doesn't really help.
there's no need.
Yeah, I was gonna say a church is only as welcoming as its congregation is.
Yeah.
You know. So
Well, but again, that to me is people taking snapshots of what's working in certain churches and saying, "Oh, I know what it
there's a
is.
coffee shop. Yeah,
it's the coffee shop."
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
And-
genuinely sparks people that want to talk to each other at a coffee shop, when realistically people just want to get a coffee and grab their book or go work on their,
Yeah.
work or everything like that. Like if you walk into an actual coffee shop, what all discussion is going on there?
yeah.
Like most of the time it's either I'm talking with my friend who's next to me,
Yep.
or
You don't normally go there to specifically talk with new people that you
Yeah.
haven't met before.
No.
I mean, if you do, great. I'm just saying in reality, it's not why they exist, and it's not why people go to them.
and then you continue past that and you get to the actual sanctuary,
Sure.
which is pitch black, except for all of the LED lights, the fancy stage lights that are going on.
So like a concert venue.
It's like a concert venue.
Okay.
And the stage is set up weirdly in a corner. And I'm not trying to call them out specifically for all that they're doing wrong at this church in particular, because there are a lot of churches that do this kind of thing.
Again, very popular.
To which a praise song is sung. And we've had this conversation about praise songs before, with the whole inverted pyramid like style structure, where the first one is supposed to be something that like brings you into worship, like kind of a friendly greeting song, and then the next one is more of your getting to know the subject, bringing in a somber feel, that kind of a thing. Whereas this was one song, 40-minute sermon, second song. And as far as I know, as a younger person, and even now, I fall asleep during 40-minute sermons in a black room. Don't know about you guys.
You know what? That's actually legitimate. I probably would. I'm always tired.
But again, this whole idea of a black room, you can't see the congregation, which sometimes I like that idea of. Because it's this conversation that we had earlier about filling all your pews. And I think we had that on Tuesday, that conversation. But if you can't see the pews and how many people are in it, does it matter?
Yeah.
And a lot of this with the new technology that we have, and videotaping our services and streaming our services and all this kind of stuff, some of those front door aspects no longer matter.
Okay.
And especially during COVID. Like, I have a coffee shop in my church. Great, I'm watching it online. I'm not going to go to your coffee shop. And you lose some of this personable thing, but then your service has to stand up. Because if your service doesn't stand up and stand out as somehow reaching everyone, then there's no reason for somebody to come back to a church.
Okay.
Well, and I think what we're going to find after COVID is a lot of people won't.
Well, a lot of people won't. But does that mean that there is no church anymore?
You see, well, and that's why I've been, one of my passions in church is that we need to change. I said that as I said, we don't need to change for the first year in a church. But on a practical standpoint, as a large church, the way we approach ministry, it needs to change tenfold. Like we really have gotten so very stuck in the traditional side of this is how a service goes, or this is what needs to happen for it to be considered, or we need to make everybody happy, or all of these things.
Even a lot of places that try to thrive on being specifically called non-traditional end up falling in a very similar or the same exact structure,
Well, and it's because it would be really easy if we found one thing that worked and then that one thing kept working forever.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, that's not true.
Yeah.
And one of the best things that I ever read was when people compare, like now, me and Elijah have our 1-year-old daughter. If we compare what she's going through with what we went through, you can't. Because she's growing up around, one, she's in a different city, she's around different people, going through a different time period, and there really isn't carryover. But,
especially like in modern times. Like you were saying earlier.
Well, and like for a long time in there was not much that changed from generation to generation from livelihood, because there weren't, advancements were much further
yeah.
between, I guess, or they didn't necessarily impact the everyday person. But we haven't been doing that with church. We keep saying it worked for me 20 years ago. It's going to work for these people. And if it doesn't, there's something wrong with those people instead of there's something wrong with church. And it's just human nature to try to adapt everything into your own context.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when your goal is to reach people who aren't in your context, it's a really bad way to do ministry, because it's all about you. And it's never, the gospel is very clear that is the opposite of what you're trying to do here. The gospel is all about Christ. And in that, Christ is all about bringing all people to him and to God. And therefore, we need to kind of get out of our own heads, get out of our own comfort zones, and stop looking and saying, okay, every single worship service needs to have this. And if it doesn't, that's it. Like, one of the things that I've really appreciated that we're trying in our basement online service that Andy mentioned earlier is we're trying a conversation-based sermon. We completely exited a sermon and are switching to two people talking about a scripture and talking about how it impacts a daily life or impacts people's daily lives. At least I hope that's what we're doing. That's the goal.
Right.
And part of that is because one of the things that people really, really like, I know I'm saying this on a podcast, is podcasts. People like to listen to conversation.
Yeah.
That's something that more people are willing to engage with rather than being talked to.
Yeah.
And if we don't start looking at how are people actually engaging material, how do we get people to see how the gospels impact their daily life, then we're never gonna make it out of this hole that we've dug ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I would probably say that I'm trying to think of the best way to actually put my thought into words right now, but if we're talking on a practical level on what works or what doesn't, or what's effective and what's not effective, you could probably point to certain methods that the church does and actually say, yeah, that's probably good or that's probably bad. But if we're talking on like if we're talking about it on like a moral level, I think the point we're trying to get across from mostly though is that it's not really about just the way that a church does a service, or if a church has a steeple or if it doesn't, or if a church has a front coffee shop or not, then it makes it a good church or a bad church. Because I think when we're talking about like on a moral level, what we're trying to say is that what's not important is just the way that you do it. What's important is your morals behind it and what's important to you. And like Ruth was saying before, what should be important is that we build and we focus on building a church that at its core is about spiritual transformation for all people. Mm-hmm. That is the most important thing. And I think outside of talking about on a practical level, like what can draw people in or what younger generations like more, outside of talking just about that and instead just focusing on what makes a church or the things that a church does good or bad. It's not even all just about whether or not, a church, you have a church that has a steeple on it. You have a church that looks traditional, or that you have a church that has short sermons or 40-minute sermons. What's important is whether you're willing to change that. Mm-hmm. And if you are or if you're not, regardless, is that if you're willing to, if it means that you're going to help transform or help bring in people who need it. Because if it's focused on just your image and the reason that you don't change is only because you think the image of the church should be a church that is A or B or C, or if you're only changing because you think the image of the church has to be that way and that's at the forefront, then you are on the wrong page.
And I'd just like to point out, if your worship service is the only thing that's contributing to your image, you have a big problem too.
So I think you can have the conversation of on a practical level outside of just trying to say good churches do this and do things this way and bad churches don't do that. Because it's not just about that. It's about the heart behind it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's, again, one of the reasons that brought us here to this podcast that is called Church is Stupid, comma, but. Thank you, Andy. Because honestly, for me, I'm sick of the image. I'm sick of pretending like everything is going great and pretending like there aren't people who get frustrated, who get cast out by the church, who are hurt, who are thrown away and treated like they're nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I am really sick of that. I would rather see a church and have a church tell me every single time, we're broken. We're trying our best,
Yeah.
but sometimes we do things that don't work, and sometimes we do things that
Yeah.
have hurt, and just talk about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then go to a church that sweeps that all under the rug and everyone is happy all the time and does all of these things, because what you usually find is that everyone's not happy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They just think they have to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And life is more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And it always has been. So that's why it's so important to have these conversations and to not be so focused on image, because you can, as we've learned from the era of social media, what's happening on somebody's Facebook page is not indicative of what's happening in their life.
Yeah.
What's happening
Yeah.
on somebody's Instagram page is not indicative of what's happening in their life. And what's happening on Sunday morning in a church service is not necessarily indicative of the faith of that church.
Yeah.
So we are running out of time, and we are
Yeah.
out of time. And I was trying to find a song, but it says, "We are lost and broken people, turn our hearts into a steeple," and just turning our hearts into the church that actually, we want to be.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my open invitation to you listeners is turn your heart into a steeple. Let us know your thoughts, comments, concerns about what we've said today. Like, scroll down, leave us a comment. Tell us about your church. Tell us about what it means to turn your heart into a steeple.
Yeah.
Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
You sure you don't want to ask if we have a Twitter?
I know this time.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah, we'll see you all next weck. For all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Comma butt.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
We hope you have a great week.